age. The frame defines a world age because the polar axis and the colors form, and the colures rather, form an indivisible whole. The entire frame is thrown out of kilter if one part is moved. If one part moves, they all move. Well, the precession of the equinoxes is a moving of the entire world frame, yes. Well, when this happens, a new pole star with appropriate colures of its own must replace the obsolete apparatus. So the idea here, and he goes on page 234 and 235. I have to read this to you. The plane that separates the solid earth and sea is not on our earth. He says this is represented by the celestial equator. So half of the zodiac is under water, that is the southern ecliptic, the southern night sky that we don't see here in the north, and it's bordered by the points of the equinoxes. And meanwhile, it's necessary to explain again what Earth is. We take it for a pancake. This is why the Earth is called flat. But let's understand the idea. This is on page 235. The mythical Earth is in fact a plane. But it is not this plane. It is not our Earth at all. It's not our globe, nor a presupposed homocentric Earth. Earth is the implied plane through the 4 points of the year, the equinoxes and the solstices. In other words, the ecliptic. And this is why this Earth is very frequently said to be quadrangular. The 4 corners of the Earth is the zodiacal constellations rising heliactically at both the equinoxes and solstices. These are the parts of the frame, scamba. These are the points which determine an Earth. In other words, every world age has its own Earth. It is for this very reason that the ends of the world are said to take place. A new Earth really does arise when another set of zodiacal constellations is brought in by the precession of the equinoxes that determines the year points. This is all cosmological. This is all the idea of the 4 quarters of the earth as Joseph Smith expressed it in our facsimiles in the book of Abraham. So I want to get to Raphael Pitani, the Hebrew goddess, the 3rd enlarged edition, published in 1978 and 1990 from Wayne State University. His discussion of the Hebrew goddess Asherah is very remarkable. He goes through various Old Testament passages showing that while the prophets of Baal and Baalism was completely prophesied against and fought against, Asherah wasn't even touched. She was definitely worshipped, and she was part of the Temple of Solomon. No question there. After his lengthy discussion, I just want to give you a brief idea here on Raphael Pitani's direction that he went, page 49. It is also noteworthy that the only image said to have been introduced into the temple in the course of Manasseh's restoration of the old forms of worship was that of Asherah. If Manasseh did not bother to replace the brazen serpent, the other image removed from the temple by his father, this was probably due to the fact that with the passage of time, the worship of a deity symbolized or represented by a serpent figure had become obsolete. Now this is my comment, this is the famous Nehushtan that Moses himself built. This is not a pagan object that later prophets destroyed, and it used to be in the temple along with the Asherah. I just want you to be aware of that. Well, Pitani's idea, not so Asherah, whose motherly figure must have been dear to many worshippers, and whose restoration to her traditional place in the temple was therefore considered a religious act of great importance. It is tempting to conjecture that the mythical motivation behind Manasseh's act was the conviction that Yahweh's consort, the great mother goddess Asherah, must be restored to her old and lawful place at the side of her husband. Well, this is definitely the direction that scholarship took, especially with William G. Dever's text, Did God Have a Wife? And his answer is absolutely positively in the affirmative. Before I share a little bit more of him, I want to get to Mark Smith's The Early History of God, Yahweh, and the Other Ancient Deities in Ancient Israel, Harper and Row Publications, 1990. Very excellent, interesting study. He notes on page 94 and 95, the history of the Israelite Asherah apparently ended with the Judean exile. Now see, this is the time Lehi left Jerusalem. The Judean exiles, when Babylon came and destroyed it 600 BC. Lehi had hightailed it out. And this is why Dan Peterson's article, Nephi and his Asherah, is so important. Because Nephi had his cultural baggage, his understanding, his education with him when they left. And his equating the woman and the divine child with the meaning of this tree as the condescension of God, and so on and so forth, as Peterson analyzed, is remarkable because it is perfectly the ancient Near Eastern understanding of the meaning of the love of God, as symbolized by a tree with white fruit, which other ancient texts also equate. Well, so anyway, he mentions various scholars and others who compared the figure of wisdom to the Canaanite goddess Asherah. If the symbolic content of the Asherah was in any sense a model for the figure of wisdom, it may have been due to the influence of the indigenous cult of Yahweh and his Asherah. This is an archaeological inscription found and published years ago. The tree of life. This recalls the Asherah that appears in Israelite tradition as a metaphorical expression for wisdom. Genesis 3:22, Proverbs 3:18, Revelations 2:7. Well, like the symbol of the Asherah, wisdom is a female figure, providing life and nurturing. See, this principle of our figure 7 with the ithyphallic deity, the male deity, is all about the same idea, life and nurturing. This is the symbolism. Life and nurturing. Well, Proverbs 3:18 is especially pertinent. She is a tree of life to those who lay hold of her. Those who hold her fast are made happy. This verse closes a small unit consisting of verses 13 through 18 and forms, with verse 13, a conspicuous chiasm, a type of poetic structure connecting 4 terms. Verse 13 opens with, happy the one who finds wisdom. Hashrei Adam, Masa Chochmah is the Hebrew. The unit begins and ends with the same root, Ashra. To be happy, that's its meaning, specifically with Ashra, happy, in verse 13, and Meushar, to be made happy, in verse 18. The inside term of the chiasm are Chochmah, wisdom, and Etz Chaim, a tree of life. Finally, the terms Ashra and Meushra perhaps allude to the Asherah, the tree symbolizing life and well-being. Well-being, this is so important, this grand key words of the priesthood. Everything associated with that wedge-out eye being presented to our figure 7 is nurturing, wholesome, upbuilding, spiritual. It is an empowerment. I'll put it that way. It is an empowerment, and I'll get to the phenomenal symbolism of the wedge-out eye as well. So life and well-being. Oh yes, this is our figure 7, as well as his female consort, Isis, the serpent in the sky. Well, this is the same principle in the Hebraic priesthood. Jehovah and his wife, his consort, Asherah. That's the whole reason I'm bringing this background material out. You bet. Well, Ben Sira, Ecclesiastes in our Old Testament, he continues and amplifies the female personification of wisdom. He draws on the image of wisdom as a tree of life, always life. To fear the Lord is the root